We do want to turn our attention to the fight this weekend in Saudi Arabia. Alan Dawson joins us now to talk to us a bit about this. Alan, before we get into the actual nuances of how the styles match up, the fights in Saudi Arabia, the biggest stories in world sport at the moment are the sports washing going on around Newcastle and the sports washing going on around Live Golf, and yet that hasn't really come up in the boxing, maybe because we've had fights here before. I don't know. What's your take on this as somebody with a ringside seat, literally and metaphorically, for this?
Yeah, I mean, The Guardian broke a story this week that a Saudi woman was slapped with a 34-year prison sentence just for tweeting, for following and retweeting dissidents and activists. The UK publication said it was a further example of how the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman was targeting Twitter users in his campaign of repression. At my publication at Insider, just a couple of years back, one of our top reporters, Bill Bostock, uncovered an app in Saudi Arabia called Absha, which tracks the movements of women. And if one tried to move through a port, a text would be automatically sent to a male guardian saying if they had given permission for the woman to travel. And if there was no permission, the woman would be arrested, the report said. You know, there remain public beheadings on Fridays, and these are just three of many glaring human rights issues in the modern day still going on in sports. Like you say, whether it's British soccer, Live Golf or big heavyweight boxing matches, it just remains a convenient way for a nation like that to launder its image globally.
Has Anthony Joshua faced any sustained level of questioning about his willingness to help prop up this regime?
I think he has. I wouldn't say it's sustained, but he's definitely faced questions. And actually find it quite interesting because when he had the first fight there against Andy Ruiz, which was a rematch, I kind of felt, this was just my take, I kind of felt that Eddie Hearn, Matchroom chairman, was trying to act as a shield and take all of the criticism himself rather than have questions asked of athletes on the card. I feel like this is the first time that questions are really being asked of the athletes. It seems to be mainly being said to Joshua rather than Usyk. And I think Joshua even was asked a question before the fight week. This goes back a few weeks, and he actually just unwittingly described what sports washing is. He said he's got no problems with Saudi, and they treat him well. Well, of course they're going to treat you well. You're the vehicle that they're kind of sports washing through, and so yeah, I feel like this is kind of it perhaps isn't as big a story as it has been with Live Golf, but there still seems to be some pockets of good journalism. The BBC did a good article earlier this week, for instance, where they did question the main parties involved in this event.
Eddie Hearn's argument earlier in the summer was that boxing isn't golf because in boxing you put your health on the line, and in a sport that you're putting your health on the line, I as a promoter need to be doing everything in my power to make as much money for you. How did that argument wash with people who are asking the tough questions?
I mean, Eddie Hearn's always got something to say. I remember in the Joshua Ruiz fight, he was kind of trying to point the finger back on the media that were attending the fight, saying, but you're here. And, it didn't really make any sense because, that those publications that were there weren't really being sponsored by Saudi Arabia. They were reporting on the fight. Again, I feel like, that's probably a deflection, a tactic that Eddie Hearn's saying. I remember he was definitely getting more flack for the Ruiz fight than this Usyk rematch. And maybe it's just, the more they go back there, the less negative attention that will bring, just because it becomes a commonplace thing.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it, isn't it? Because like the Eddie Howe questions have largely stopped. There are still some questions for Eddie Howe, but nowhere near the level of intense scrutiny that he was under at the start when he took the job. We're just reporting on the latest transfer, tittle tattle to go at Newcastle. Like maybe when they get into the Champions League and maybe when they start winning Premier Leagues, the questions come back. But by then, the horse is bolted and is doing a lap of honour.
To be honest, I don't particularly get too excited at all about fights in Saudi Arabia because they're just, even aside from the sports washing element, there's just no combat sports culture there. And I just don't get the impression that they're trying to build or develop anything beyond just booking these random big events. There are regions in the Middle East that do have a burgeoning combat sports scene, one of which is Abu Dhabi. So leaders there actually instilled a jiu-jitsu program in schools, in school curriculums, and they hold international BJJ tournaments annually. They've got the UAE Warriors there, which is an MMA firm. They hold events in Abu Dhabi, and the UFC frequently goes there. So they, continue to develop various combat sports cultures there, whereas I just don't get the impression Saudi Arabia is doing anything similar to that. I feel like they're just trying to bring in, like Anthony Joshua would qualify as one of their big fights. I think they looked at Amir Khan. They had one of the Super Six tournament finals there. But beyond that, it's just a one and done sort of thing.
This weekend, it's playing out in front of, I think, 8,000 capacity arena. Like, it's obviously no Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. It's no Wembley. Like, do we know exactly how much money Saudi Arabia are actually putting into this? Because it must be pretty substantial to forego 70,000, 80,000 paying customers.
But the rumoured purses that each athlete in the main event alone is supposedly $40 million, pretty much 40 million euro, 35 million pounds. So that's 70 to 80 million straight away. Eddie Hearn signed off quite a lot of power to Saudi Arabia for, they took ownership for the broadcasting, which is, I actually don't think this fight has got much buzz, if at all, over here in the US. And I think that's because they only really announced a broadcast partner in the last week with DAZN and also ppv.com. It seemed like Sky Sports were kind of slow to build up, their own promotion for it. What can you say there?
In the US, what time will the fight actually take place?
I think be about mid-afternoon. I think the ring walks would be 3:30 for me on the West Coast. I kind of had to think where I live then.
Yeah.
On the Pacific time.
I mean, it's interesting because, 3-4 years ago, before he was beaten, it looked like Anthony Joshua was going to become one of those very totemic international sports icons who can draw a crowd literally anywhere in the globe, and then all of a sudden that fell away. So to move on from the sports washing and to get to the boxing, the fight's very important from his perspective.
Yeah, I actually remember when he first came to America. I didn't live here by then, but I was reporting on how Sky, he was with Sky at the time rather than DAZN, and Eddie Hearn and Matchroom, they were really promoting him like a Roger Federer of boxing, like a Tiger Woods, Michael Jordan, LeBron. They really wanted him. They were really marketing not just to be the British or European face of the sport, like a worldwide celebrity. And then what happened in New York, it wasn't, like a 12-round loss. It was a complete humiliation, 4 knockdowns. It was a, savage beating. One of the best wins in the modern heavyweight era for Andy Ruiz on that side. And, they've never come back to America since. There's been a bit of a rebuild. But again, then he lost the titles again to Oleksandr Usyk, and I was ringside for that fight. It was a magical atmosphere in North London because you guys know in Ireland as well, coming out of quite severe successive lockdowns, how much people wanted to get out again, and there was just a carnival party atmosphere in London at the time. The weather was good. There were pop-up food stalls all the way into the stadium, and the ring walks were really good. The card itself was quite poor, but I remember Callum Smith getting a good knockout on that card, but it was really all about the main event, and boy, did the main event deliver. It was amazing. Joshua wasn't really in it until the middle third of the fight. Usyk had the first third and the final third locked down, and he was more dominant in those thirds that he won than Joshua was, and I just see a repeat performance here. I really feel like Joshua did. He was built strong after winning gold in London in 2012 in the Olympics, but I feel like taking another fight in Saudi Arabia, a second one that should really be put in the UK. I feel like there might be a bit of a team. He needs to kind of win over a lot of the fans that he did have prior. I still think he'd be able to sell out stadiums easily in the UK. But going to Saudi Arabia once for a cash grab, okay, but to do it again and again and again, you're kind of alienating the base that you built in back home.
Does it also speak to an uncertainty in their camp that actually maybe he won't be able to fill those stadiums as much anymore? That actually he's not the draw because he's not as good as we were told he was. He hasn't delivered on the potential that was there. And actually what's happened is his late arrival in boxing and his lack of ring craft and all that kind of stuff that was supposed to have been to his benefit. He's not heavily fought. He won't have the damage that other fighters have had coming through the system. It's like, well, actually he's just not as an accomplished a boxer because he hasn't done the rounds. He hasn't done the sparring.
I think he's definitely overachieved in the sport of boxing. He's a two-time world heavyweight champion, and I really credit. Like, I've done a few of these podcasts and shows now, and you really have to credit his testicular fortitude in losing a fight and just seeking the immediate rematch. That's what champions do. But who he's fighting isn't just a champion. He's a level beyond that, and we're looking at an all-time great athlete and fighter in Usyk. But I'm quite convinced he's going to lose again, and it could even be by knockout this time. But I don't think it's going to do his ability to sell out a stadium much harm. I still think there's big fights out there for him. I really think a fight against Deontay Wilder would be a monster event, especially here in Vegas. There could be a trilogy bout with Andy Ruiz because they've got one win each, and they could have a deciding fight there. I don't know if you guys remember, but there was quite a bit of a controversy with a heavyweight called Jarrell Miller, who Anthony Joshua was supposed to fight instead of fighting Ruiz. But Jarrell Miller kept on popping for steroid after steroid after steroid. He'd basically taken a whole cocktail of performance-enhancing drugs. But these sort of controversies that can end up just, boxing kind of thrives on this negative headlines a lot of the time. And a fight against Jarrell Miller could, in New York as well, it could be Joshua's return to New York. That could be a big fight. That's 3 fights off the top of my head that I think, even if Joshua loses, there's still, the big fights, big events available to him. And it's kind of testament to how thriving the heavyweight division is, even in the absence of, potentially Tyson Fury claiming he's retired.
What about Usyk then? And I saw his manager during the week say, I've never seen anyone in 45-degree heat ride a bike for 100 kilometres. I've never seen anyone swim for 5 hours. I've never seen anyone hold their breath underwater for 4 minutes and 40 seconds, almost passing away and then shaking himself. I hope this will all help on Saturday. It's probably one of the nuggets that we've got this week that's actually been entertaining in the build-up. Usyk at the age of 35 now. I guess if you're talking about somebody trying to make their earnings before they retire, he's possibly in that position, but I get the sense that you make him the favourite this weekend too.
Yeah, they said, like, how can we watch that first fight and think that Joshua in 9 or 10 months or less than a year is really going to make the changes necessary? Granted, he's brought in Robert Garcia, who trains quite aggressive fighters, and if they're going to go that aggressive route, really it's his only way he's going to be able to win. He's never going to win a decision against a far superior boxer in Usyk. The only way to really try and win is to seek a knockout, but by doing so, you just risk getting knocked out yourself, particularly as he could have been finished by Usyk in the first fight. What was the question? Sorry.
It was just more so that you're still making Usyk favourite, and at the age of 35, there's no signs of slowing down. But also, I mean, that quote from his manager, we don't get to see. It just hasn't felt like a very entertaining build-up, and I guess that quote kind of stuck out as something where there's actually been a slight glimmer of fun in the build-up to this, because we've got no trash talk really to speak of.
No, I mean, you rarely do with Anthony Joshua, and neither Usyk, but the difference between them, I think Usyk's got more personality. We definitely saw that in London, where he was dressing up as the Joker, and we've seen fashion choices kind of permeate through this fight week too. Usyk's quite a lot of fun, and it's good to see I would say heavyweights, but just 2 boxers kind of not need to descend to politically incorrect or trash talk just for the sake of it. The one thing that could you could say might pull Usyk away from the mission at hand is just what's going on in his homeland. within days of Russia invading Ukraine on February the 24th, he was back in Ukraine, patrolling the streets with a machine gun. I think he's had family that have evacuated, but from reports this week, it sounds like he hasn't really seen his children for at least 6 months. So he's barely seen them, and he's walking around Saudi Arabia with a donkey, cuddly toy that his daughter gave him, that we might even see certainly in the locker room on the night, potentially in the corner. So whether those things kind of play in your mind, but I just think I think we're reaching to think that can really have an effect on the fight. But it's a potential tangible nonetheless.
What happens for him if he wins next?
He could potentially lure. How can we really believe anything Tyson Fury says? But I feel like he said he's retired about 10 times in the last 2 years. A fight between Usyk and Tyson Fury, if anyone can challenge Tyson Fury, it is definitely Usyk, particularly if he gets a second win in more convincing fashion than he did last year. Great fight. A fight against Wilder, great fight because it's two contrasting styles. Wilder, just a concussive puncher who's 6'8", 6'9" against Usyk, who's 6'3" and just a masterful boxer. There's still great fights out there for Usyk, but the really interesting thing for him is that if he goes out and he beats Fury, goes out and beats Wilder, maybe Joe Joyce and some of the other big names, he only really needs to beat probably even those three, and he's cleaned out the division. He just cleaned out cruiserweight. He arguably one-upped the legacy that Evander Holyfield had at cruiserweight. If he goes and does similar in heavyweight, then we're going to begin to ask questions that, not only is this one of the best cruiserweight fighters of all time, but is this one of the, top 25 fighters in boxing history?